from the burning bush. He called in a still, small voice, and he said, Moses, Moses. And Moses listened, and he answered and said, Lord, here am I. And the voice in the bush said, Moses, draw not nigh, but take off your shoes, for you are standing on holy ground. And Moses stopped where he stood. And Moses took off his shoes. And Moses looked at the burning bush. And he heard the voice, but he saw no man. Then God again spoke to Moses, and he spoke in a voice of thunder. I am the Lord God Almighty. I am the Lord God of thy fathers. I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. And Moses hid his face. And God said to Moses, I've seen the awful suffering of my people down in Egypt. I've watched their hard oppressors, their overseers and drivers. The groans of my people have filled my ears, and I can't stand it no longer. So I'm come down to deliver them out of the land of Egypt. And I will bring them out of that land and into the land of Canaan. Therefore, Moses, go down into Egypt and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses said, Lord, who am I to make such a speech before Pharaoh? For Lord, you know that I am slow of tongue. But God said, I will be thy mouth, and I will be thy tongue. Therefore, Moses, go down yonder into Egypt land, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses with his rod in hand went down and said to Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go. And Pharaoh looked at Moses, and he stopped still and looked at Moses. And he said to Moses, Who is this God? I know all the gods of Egypt, but I know no God of Israel. So go back, Moses, and tell your God, I will not let this people go. Poor old Pharaoh. He knows all the knowledge of Egypt, yet he never knew the one and the living God. Poor old Pharaoh, he's got all the power of Egypt, and he's going to try to test his strength with the might of the great Jehovah, with the might of the Lord God of hosts, the Lord mighty in battle, and God sitting high up in his heaven, laugh at poor old Pharaoh. And Pharaoh called the overseers, and Pharaoh called the drivers, and he said, Put heavier burden still on the backs of the Hebrew children. Then the people chode with Moses, and they cried out, Look here, Moses, you've been to Pharaoh, but look and see what Pharaoh's done to us now. And Moses was troubled in mind. But God said, Go again, Moses, you and your brother Aaron, and will say once more to Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go. And Moses and Aaron, with their rods in hand, worked many signs and wonders. But Pharaoh called for his magic men, and they worked wonders too. So Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not, no, he would not let God's people go. And God rained down plagues on Egypt, plagues of frogs and lice and locusts. plagues of blood and boils and darkness, and other plagues beside. But every time God moved the plague, old Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not, no, he would not let God's people go. And Moses was troubled in mind. Then the Lord said, listen, Moses, the God of Israel will not be mocked. Just one more witness of my power I'll give hard-hearted Pharaoh. This very night, about midnight, I'll pass over Egypt land in my righteous wrath, and I will pass over and smite their firstborn dead. And God that night passed over, and the cry went up out of Egypt. And Pharaoh rose in the middle of the night, and he sent in a hurry for Moses. And he said, go forth from among my people, you and all the Hebrew children. Take your goods and take your flocks and get away from the land of Egypt. And right then, Moses led them out with all their goods and all their flocks. And God went on before, a guiding pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And they journeyed on in the wilderness and came down to the Red Sea. In the morning, in the morning, they missed the Hebrew children. 400 years. 400 years. They held them down in Egypt now. Held them under the driver's lash. Working without money and without price. And it might have been Pharaoh's wife that said, Pharaoh, look what you've done. You let those Hebrew children go. And who's going to serve us now? Who's going to make our bricks and mortar? Who's going to plant and grow our corn? Who's going to get up in the chill of the morning? Who's going to work in the blazing sun? Pharaoh, tell me that. And Pharaoh called his generals. And the generals called the captains. And the captains called the soldiers. And they hitched up all the chariots, 600 chosen chariots of war, and 2,400 horses. And the chariots were all full of men, with swords and shields and shiny spears, and battle bows and arrows. And Pharaoh and his army pursued the Hebrew children to the edge of the Red Sea. Now, the children of Israel, looking back, saw Pharaoh's army coming. And the rumble of the chariots was like a thunderstorm, and the whirring of the wheels was like a rushing wind. And the dust from the horses made a cloud that darkened the day. And the glittering of the spears was like lightnings in the night. And the children of Israel lost all faith. The children of Israel lost all hope. Deep Red Sea in front of them, the Pharaoh's host behind. And they mumbled and grumbled amongst themselves. Were there no graves in Egypt? And they wailed aloud to Moses and said, slavery in Egypt was better than to come to die here in this wilderness. Yeah. But Moses said, stand still. Stand still. And see the Lord's salvation. For the Lord God of Israel will not forsake his people. The Lord will break the chariots. The Lord will break the horsemen. He'll break great Egypt's sword and shield, the battle bows and arrows. This day he'll make proud Pharaoh know who is the God of Israel. And Moses lifted up his rod over the Red Sea. And God, with a blast of his nostrils, blew the waters apart. And the waves rolled back and stood up in a pound, and left the path through the middle of the sea, dry as the sands of the desert. And the children of Israel all crossed over on to the other side. When Pharaoh saw them crossing dry, he dashed on in behind them, Old Pharaoh got about halfway across, and God unlatched the waters. And the waves rushed back together. And Pharaoh and all his army got lost. And all his hosts got drowned. And Moses sang and Miriam danced. And the people of God shouted for joy. And God led the Hebrew children on till they reached the promised land. Listen. All you sons of Pharaoh, who do you think can hold God's people? When the Lord God himself said, let my people go.